Once you have your statistical hypothesis, then you need to think about how you will design your research. In fact, setting up statistical hypothesis is closely related to the research design, as operationalization is all about the research design. First and foremost, a research project must be feasible within the available resources, such as time and money. So you should be able to complete and finish your project given the time and money. Therefore, there are lots of things you need to consider. For example, how many subjects or participants you need to recruit for the project. In general, the more you have, the better your outcome will be, but you know you cannot have an infinite number of subjects, so you need to decide how many will be enough for your project. And who will be your subject? Humans or animals? Normals or patients? Your hypothesis will also play a role in selecting the type of subject. And measurement is directly related to the data collection, and for a quality data collection, you need to choose carefully what you measure is what you intend to measure. There can be multiple ways to or equipment to measure the same construct. For example, to measure visual acuity, there can be many different ways to measure it depending upon the purpose of your research. If your research involves human subject, then you need to go through the ethics board. When there's special population or patients, then you need to take extra steps to ensure their well-being. Finally, you need to think about the actual design of your research. Research design can be categorized in different ways based on the different aspects of research. So, for example, a research can be mainly qualitative or quantitative, depending upon the nature of data collected. So, if you intend to collect the data in the form of words or media, then this kind of research can be categorized as qualitative research. And most of the qualitative research usually explorative and descriptive. On the other hand, if the data collected in the form of numbers, then this kind of research is categorized as quantitative research. And the data collected in this form are subject to further numerical analysis as opposed to qualitative research design. On the other hand, a research can be categorized into either descriptive or analytic research depending upon the goal of the study or the purpose of the study. So if you are mainly interested in measuring and summarizing the pattern or frequency of a variable of interest, then this kind of research is categorized as descriptive research design. On the other hand, if you're interested in the dynamics between the variables based on the descriptive data collected on those variables, then this type of research is categorized as analytic design. So in analytic design, hypotheses about the variables are formally tested to find out the nature of the dynamics between those variables. A research can also be categorized into observational or experimental based on the role of the investigator. In an observational study, the investigators act as innocent bystanders, watching, measuring, or investigating the variables of interest without attempting to change any of those variables under investigation. On the other hand, the investigator in the experimental design will be actively involved in manipulating one or more exploratory variables to see their effects on the other response variables. This design is almost always analytical, where hypotheses about the relationship between the variables are formally tested. In fact, an observational study can be an analytic at the same time too. However, when a notable relationship is observed between the variables of both observational and experimental design, it is only the experimental design to be able to say something about the causal relationship between the variables, assuming that the experimental study is carefully controlled. However, you cannot suggest this kind of causation from the seemingly same result of the observational study because of several reasons that we will see later in this class. So before we talk about those differences in design between the correlational, observational, and experimental design, let's talk about why a simple correlation between the two variables does not necessarily mean they are causally related, because we make this false inference quite frequently. For now, just remember that correlation between two variables does not provide a sufficient evidence for them to be causally related, even though strong correlation is a necessary condition for a causal relationship. So you may heard that playing violent video games or watching violent TV makes children violent. Let's assume that you want to test this claim on your own and found very strong correlation between the two variables where playing violent video game is the explanatory variable and the violent personality or tendency or behaviors measured by frequency of violent behaviors or languages is the response variable of the study. So your study suggests that the more you play the violent video games, the more violent you become. Assuming that the study was very well managed and designed and the evidence was legit, then what do you think would people take away from this study? So, this is the hypothetical result. On the horizontal axis, we have our explanatory variable A, which is the number of hours playing violent video game. And on the vertical axis, we have the response variable B, which is the violent behavior. As the data suggests, the more you play, the more violent behaviors are displayed, and this relationship is almost perfectly correlated. In this case, can we conclude that the original hypothesis is supported, meaning that violent video game is a true culprit behind the violent behavior? Well, it may be or maybe not. When two variables change together or they are correlated with each other, their relationship is not necessarily causal. For example, it is possible that event A is the direct cause of B. If this is to be the case, then we can say that the original hypothesis is supported where playing violent video game is the direct cause behind the violent behaviors. However, we will see exactly the same relationship when B causes A too. If that is the case, then what that means is that violent people are attracted to play more violent video games, not the other way around. So our assumption about the original hypothesis is completely reversed in this case. So if the reverse is a possibility, then these two variables can be perpetually causing each other. So in other words, the more you play violent video game, the more violent person you become. The more violent person you become, then the more you will seek out to play more violent video games. So I hope now you see where this is going. The take-home message here is that you cannot make a definite conclusion regarding the existence or the direction of a cause and effect relationship only from the fact that A and B are correlated. There can be two other possibilities behind the correlation, and we will take a look at different examples in the next slide. Okay, so the data in red are based on the official statistics from the US Office of Management and Budget, whereas the data in black are from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention of the US. So what's on the graph is the yearly change in the US spending on science, space, and technology, and the number of suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. The yearly changes in these two variables are plotted together on a double y-axis, where the left in red represents the US spending and the right in black represents the number of suicides. As it is obvious, two lines are running almost perfectly parallel. So what that means is that they increase hand in hand as years go by. So the more the US government spends on science, space, and tech, the more people commit suicide. Oh wait, maybe it's the other way around. No matter how strange it may seem, the correlation between the two events is so strong that it is close to almost 100%. Now, do you think that this is a meaningful correlation at all? You don't think that US spending on science, space, and technology somehow causes more people to commit suicide, do you? In fact, this is not the right way to explore a correlation between any two random events. However, you can make any two random events look like they are perfectly correlated with each other like this. If you're more interested, you can find more nonsense correlations between any two random events like this if you click the provided link here. Now, let's look at another relationship between the gambling and cancer. The graph you're looking at is suggesting that the more you gamble, then the more likely you will have cancer. Unlike the previous correlation, this correlation is performed correctly in that these two variables are not completely random. They are actually paired variables, which should be when you are calculating correlation between any two events. So then, what is going on here? If we don't think that gambling is causing cancer, then what is going on behind this strong relationship? Even though we see this positive association between gambling and cancer, you probably agree that gambling is not the true cause behind the cancer. Then what else can we think about it? Well, if you think about what people do when they gamble, then you will find more people to engage in unhealthy behaviors such as smoking and drinking. So the more you play, the more likely you lose, and the more likely you get stressed out too. So from these, you can infer that it is the unhealthy behaviors what are truly behind the cancer incidence, not the gambling itself. So what's really governing the relationship between the two events is the third event called tertium quid in Latin, or a confounding variable. Therefore, we always need to be very careful not to mistake a mere correlation for a true causation, because whenever we see a relationship between the two events or variables. One of the necessary conditions that needs to be established for a causal relationship between the two events is their temporal correlation. What that means is that cause always comes before the effect in time, not the other way around. However, this condition is not enough to say a relationship between any two events in time is causal just because something occurs before the other, because anything can come before any event. However, this type of reasoning error, called a post-hoc fallacy, is quite common in real life. So let's take a look at this short clip from Big Bang Theory, how Sheldon is making fun of his mom for committing this fallacy.
Oh, hi, Mom. No, I told you I'd call you when I got home. I'm not home yet. All right, I'm home. The Arctic expedition was a remarkable success. I'm all but certain there's a Nobel Prize in my future. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm entirely certain. No, Mother, I could not feel your church group praying for my safety. The fact that I'm home safe does not prove that it worked. That logic is post hoc, ergo propter hoc.
I hope you enjoyed the clip and understood what Sheldon was trying to say to his mom. During his phone conversation with his mom, she probably said something about her church group praying for his safe return from the Arctic expedition, and asked Sheldon if he felt the prayer and trying to attribute the church group prayer to his safe return. But Sheldon does not fall for this and telling his mom that she is making the post-hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, literally meaning after this, therefore because of this. So the pattern of this fallacy goes like this. Event A occurred, then B followed. Therefore, the event A must be the cause of the event B because A came before B. As an example, you may have heard a man jokingly complain about his gray hair after he got married. Obviously, he is making the post-hoc fallacy where he is blaming marriage for causing his gray hair just because marriage happened before he is having gray hair. But what is the true cause behind his gray hair? It is his getting old getting him gray hair, not the marriage. So this fallacy becomes all sources of magical thinking, jinx, or superstition. So far, we have looked at different cases to illustrate why we should not assume a causal relationship too quickly, even when we face a strong correlation. Remember, correlation does not imply causation.